The winter of 1784 arrived early in Clemson Creek, a settlement nestled against the Appalachian foothills where judgment came easier than kindness. Martha Hayes stood behind the general store counter, her substantial frame pressed against the wooden edge as she counted coins with trembling fingers. At 19 years old, she had learned to make herself small despite her size, to disappear into corners and shadows, to become invisible in a town that saw her only as an object of ridicule. Her father, Samuel Hayes, owned the store, though owned was perhaps too generous a word for a man who seemed to possess nothing but contempt for his only child. He stood near the door now, his weathered face twisted into its perpetual scowl as he spoke to Widow Patterson about the quality of flour. "That girl of mine," he said, loud enough for Martha to hear, as he always did, "eats more than she's worth. Don't know why the Lord saw fit to curse me with such a burden. Well." Martha's hands stilled on the coins. She had heard these words, or variations of them, every day of her life. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, and Samuel Hayes had spent 19 years making certain his daughter understood the cost of her existence. The bell above the door chimed, and 3 young women entered, daughters of the town's more prosperous families. Rebecca Thornton led them, her pretty face arranged in an expression of practiced sweetness that never quite reached her cold blue eyes. "Why, Martha?" Rebecca said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I do believe you've grown even larger since Sunday service. However do you manage to fit through doorways?" Her companions giggled, the sound like breaking glass in Martha's ears. She kept her eyes down, focusing on the grain of the wooden counter. "Leave off, Rebecca," Martha whispered, though she knew the words would only encourage more cruelty. "Speak up, girl," her father barked from across the room. "Nobody can hear your mumbling, though I suppose that's a mercy, considering you've got nothing worth saying." Rebecca leaned across the counter, her perfume overwhelming in the small space. "My mother says it's a wonder you haven't eaten your father out of house and home. She says you're like a plague of locusts, all appetite and no shame." Martha felt the familiar burning behind her eyes but refused to let the tears fall. She had learned long ago that tears only fed their cruelty, gave them more ammunition for their relentless assault. The afternoon dragged on in similar fashion, each customer bringing fresh insults or pitying glances that somehow hurt worse than the open mockery. By the time Martha climbed the narrow stairs to her small room above the store, exhaustion had settled into her bones like a physical weight. She lit a single candle and sat on her bed, pulling out the one treasure she possessed, a book of poetry she had found discarded behind the church 3 years ago. The pages were worn soft from countless readings, and she traced the words with gentle fingers, letting the beauty of the language transport her somewhere beyond Clemson Creek, beyond her father's hatred and the town's cruelty. Outside her window, snow began to fall, covering the ugly world in a blanket of white that made everything clean and new, if only for a moment. Thomas Bridger had not set foot in a town for 3 years, not since he had buried his wife and infant son in the hard ground of Western Virginia, and walked away from civilization with nothing but his rifle and his grief. The mountains had welcomed him, asked nothing of him but survival, and he had learned to live in the spaces between the trees where human voices could not reach. But winter had come fierce and early, and his supplies had run low. The lynx that had been his only companion for the past year nudged his leg as they stood at the edge of the tree line, looking down at Clemson Creek with mutual suspicion. "Just a quick visit, Shadow," Thomas murmured to the animal, running his hand through the lynx's thick fur. "We get what we need and we leave." The lynx, a magnificent creature with tufted ears and silver-gray fur, had come to him as a kit, orphaned by a hunter's trap. Thomas had nursed it back to health, and the animal had simply stayed, becoming the only family he had left in the world. They walked into town as the sun reached its zenith, Thomas's tall frame and wild appearance drawing stares and whispers. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, his beard was untrimmed, and his buckskin clothing marked him as someone who lived beyond the boundaries of polite society. The general store was his destination, and as he pushed through the door, the bell's chimes seemed to freeze every conversation in place. Shadow padded in beside him, causing Widow Patterson to gasp and clutch her shawl. "That's a wild animal," Samuel Hayes said, his hand moving toward the shotgun he kept beneath the counter. "She's tame," Thomas replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Won't hurt anyone unless provoked. I need supplies." From the corner of his eye, he saw a movement and turned to see a young woman pressed against the far wall, her eyes wide not with fear but with wonder as she looked at Shadow. The lynx, seeming to sense a kindred spirit, moved toward her slowly. "Martha, get away from that beast!" Samuel shouted, but the girl did not move. Instead, she slowly extended her hand, and Shadow, in a gesture that surprised even Thomas, leaned forward and allowed herself to be touched. "She's beautiful," Martha whispered, and Thomas heard in those two words a depth of loneliness that matched his own. "That's the first sensible thing that girl's ever said," Samuel muttered. "Now somebody get that creature out of my store before it eats all my merchandise. Lord knows my daughter's doing enough of that already." Thomas felt something shift in his chest, old familiar anger he thought he had left behind in the civilized world. He looked at Martha properly now, saw the shame in her posture, the way she tried to make herself smaller, and recognized the signs of someone who had been broken slowly, methodically, by people who should have protected her. Over the next hour, as Thomas gathered his supplies, he watched. He saw how Samuel Hayes spoke to his daughter, how the other customers whispered and pointed, how Martha moved through the space like a ghost, trying desperately not to be seen. When Rebecca Thornton and her friends entered, their cruelty was so casual, so practiced, that Thomas understood this was not an isolated incident, but a pattern worn smooth by repetition. "Why, it's the wild man from the mountain," Rebecca said, giving Thomas an appraising look that made his skin crawl. "Come down to join civilization? Though I see you've brought your manners with you?" She gestured at Shadow, who had remained by Martha's side. "The lynx has better manners than most folks I've met," Thomas said quietly. Rebecca's smile faltered. "I suppose you would know about animals, living like one up there in the wilderness. Tell me, do you also know about feeding them? Perhaps you could give Martha some advice, since she seems unable to control her own appetite." The words hung in the air, and Thomas saw Martha flinch as though physically struck. Shadow made a low sound in her throat, and Martha's hand moved to soothe the animal. "Seems to me," Thomas said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet store, "that the ugliest things in this room are the ones coming out of your mouth." Rebecca's face flushed red. "How dare you speak to me that way? Do you know who my father is?" "Don't much care," Thomas replied. "I know what you are, and that's enough." Samuel Hayes moved from behind the counter, his face dark with anger. "Now you listen here, stranger. I won't have you insulting the decent folk of this town." "Decent folk," Thomas repeated, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "That what you call people who torment a young woman for sport? That what passes for decent in Clemson Creek?" "That's my daughter you're talking about, and I'll thank you to mind your own business. The girl needs toughening up. World's a hard place, and she needs to learn that." Thomas looked at Martha, saw the tears she was trying so hard to hold back, saw the way her shoulders shook with the effort of remaining silent. Shadow pressed closer to her, and Martha's fingers buried themselves in the lynx's fur like a drowning person clutching a lifeline. "Pack up my supplies," Thomas said to Samuel, "and add enough for two." "Two?" Samuel's eyebrows raised. "Your daughter's coming with me." The store erupted in chaos. Samuel shouted, Rebecca and her friends gasped in scandalized delight, and Widow Patterson declared she had never heard of such a thing in all her days. Through it all, Martha stood silent, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You can't be serious," Samuel said, his face now purple with rage. "You can't just walk into my store and take my daughter." "I'm not taking anyone," Thomas replied calmly. "I'm offering her a choice, something I suspect she's never had before." He turned to Martha, who looked like a deer caught between hunters, her body tensed for flight though she had nowhere to run. "I've got a cabin up in the mountains," Thomas said gently. "It's not much, but it's warm and it's safe. You can stay through the winter, help me with the trapping and hunting. Come spring, you can decide what you want to do. Stay with me, go somewhere else, even come back here if that's your choice. But it will be your choice, not anyone else's." "The girl's simple-minded," Samuel said. "She can't make decisions for herself. I'm her father, and I say she stays." "Are you simple-minded?" Thomas asked Martha directly. She shook her head slowly, and for the first time since he had entered the store, Thomas saw a spark of something that might have been hope in her eyes. "Are you happy here?" This time, the shake of her head was more emphatic. "Then the choice is yours to make." Martha looked around the store, at her father's red face, at Rebecca's sneering expression, at the assembled townsfolk who had made her life a misery for as long as she could remember. She looked down at Shadow, who gazed back with amber eyes full of understanding. "I'll need to pack my things," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but stronger than Thomas had heard it before. "Absolutely not," Samuel roared. "I forbid it. You're my daughter and you'll do as I say." "No," Martha said, and the single word seemed to surprise her as much as it did everyone else. "No, I won't. Not anymore." She moved toward the stairs that led to her room, and Samuel grabbed her arm roughly. In an instant, Shadow was between them, her teeth bared in a silent snarl that made the older man stumble backward. "Control that beast," he shouted at Thomas. "She's controlling herself just fine," Thomas replied. "Seems she doesn't like seeing people hurt any more than I do. Now let the girl pack her things in peace, or we're going to have a problem that goes beyond words." 20 minutes later, Martha descended the stairs with a small bundle of belongings. She had changed into her warmest dress and cloak, and her hands shook as she approached Thomas. "I'm ready," she said. "This is madness," Widow Patterson declared. "The girl will freeze to death up there, or worse. You're a stranger, sir, and we know nothing about you. This is highly improper." "What's improper," Thomas said, his voice hard as winter ice, "is what's been done to this girl every day of her life. You all stood by and watched, or worse, participated. Don't talk to me about what's proper when you don't know the first thing about what's right." He offered his arm to Martha, who took it hesitantly, as though afraid it might be snatched away. Together, with Shadow padding alongside them, they walked toward the door. "You'll regret this," Samuel shouted after them. "Both of you! That girl's worthless, useless. She'll be nothing but a burden to you, stranger. You'll see." Thomas paused at the door and looked back at the assembled townspeople, his eyes moving from face to face, seeing the judgment, the hatred, the sick pleasure some of them took in others' suffering. "Bully her, and you will regret it," he said quietly. "Any of you. If I hear that anyone from this town has come looking for her, has tried to hurt her or drag her back, you'll answer to me. I've lived in these mountains long enough to know every path, every hiding place, every way in and out of this settlement. I can make your lives very difficult if I choose to. Remember that." The first mile was the hardest. Martha stumbled through the snow, unused to the rough terrain, her breath coming in short gasps. Thomas matched his pace to hers, patient as the mountains themselves, while Shadow ranged ahead and circled back, checking on them both. "We can rest when you need to," Thomas said after Martha nearly fell for the third time. "I'm fine," she panted, though she clearly was not. "Stubbornness is good," Thomas said, "but wisdom is knowing your limits. There's a clearing ahead where we can stop for a few minutes." They sat on a fallen log, and Thomas pulled out some dried meat and hardtack from his pack, offering half to Martha. She took it hesitantly. "Aren't you worried I'll eat all your supplies?" she asked, the bitterness in her voice at odds with her gentle nature. "I'm worried you won't eat enough," Thomas replied. "It's going to be a hard trek to the cabin, and you'll need your strength." Martha ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it might be her last. Shadow settled at her feet, and Martha ran her fingers through the lynx's fur, finding comfort in the animal's solid warmth. "Why did you do it?" Martha asked finally. "Why did you help me? You don't even know me." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. 3 years ago I had a wife. Her name was Sarah. She was kind and gentle, and she saw good in everyone. The town we lived in, they were like Clemson Creek. They judged her because she was different, because she was friends with the Cherokee woman who lived at the edge of town, because she didn't fit into their narrow idea of what a woman should be. He paused, swallowing hard. Muinur tap. When she died in childbirth, along with our son, those same people who had whispered about her and made her life difficult came to offer their condolences. They spoke about God's will and better places, and all I could think was that they had made her time on earth harder than it needed to be. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone escape that kind of cruelty, I would take it. Martha's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of shame or pain. "I'm sorry for your loss." "And I'm sorry for yours," Thomas replied. "Different kind of loss maybe, but loss all the same. You lost the childhood you should have had, the love you deserved. That's worth mourning too." They sat in companionable silence as the snow continued to fall, and for the first time in her life, Martha felt the possibility of something beyond mere survival. The cabin appeared through the trees like a promise kept. It was small but sturdy, built from logs Thomas had cut and fitted himself, with a stone chimney that spoke of warm fires and safe harbors. Smoke curled from that chimney now, and Martha realized Thomas must have kept it burning before he left for town. "It's not much," Thomas said as they approached, "but it's weatherproof and warm. There's a loft where you can sleep, and I'll take the space down here with Shadow." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A large fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking pot hanging from an iron hook. There were shelves lined with supplies, furs hanging from the walls for warmth, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs. A ladder led to a loft space above, where Thomas had already laid out a thick pile of furs for bedding. "It's wonderful," Martha breathed, and she meant it. After the cramped, cold room above her father's store, this felt like a palace. Thomas set about preparing a simple meal while Martha explored the cabin, touching things gently as though afraid they might disappear. Shadow stretched out in front of the fire, completely at home. "There's a stream about 50 yards east," Thomas said as he stirred the pot. "In spring and summer it's good for washing and fishing. In winter we have to melt snow for water, but it's manageable. There's a root cellar out back where we keep vegetables and preserved meat. The outhouse is marked with a tall pole so you can find it even in deep snow." Martha listened carefully, committing every detail to memory. She wanted to be useful, to prove that Thomas's faith in her had not been misplaced. They ate in comfortable silence, the warmth of the fire and the food in her belly making Martha drowsy. When Thomas showed her the loft, she climbed up to find it warm from the heat rising from below and the furs soft and thick. "Thank you," she said, looking down at Thomas from the loft, "for everything." "You're welcome, Martha. Sleep well. Tomorrow we'll start teaching you how to survive up here. It's not easy, but I think you're stronger than anyone ever gave you credit for." That night, as Martha lay in the darkness of the loft, she heard the wind howling outside and the crackling of the fire below. She heard Shadow's soft breathing and the occasional creak of Thomas moving about the cabin. For the first time in her 19 years, she felt safe. The first weeks were hard. Thomas was a patient teacher, but the skills he needed Martha to learn did not come easily. She learned to check and set traps, to skin and clean animals, to preserve meat and tan hides. Her hands, soft from years of counting coins and shelving goods, became rough and calloused. She learned to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals. She learned which plants were safe to eat and which would make her sick. She learned to move quietly through the forest, to observe without disturbing, to respect the wilderness that had become her home. Shadow became her constant companion, seeming to understand that this human needed extra protection and guidance. The lynx would walk beside Martha on her expeditions, alert to dangers that Martha's untrained senses might miss. But it was not just practical skills that Martha learned. Thomas, in his quiet way, taught her something more valuable. He taught her that she had worth. He never commented on her size, except to occasionally urge her to eat more when the work was particularly demanding. He never mocked her when she made mistakes, only showed her how to correct them. He listened when she spoke, as though her words mattered, as though she mattered. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of checking trap lines, Martha worked on repairing a snowshoe while Thomas carved a new handle for his knife. "Can I ask you something?" Martha said. "Of course." "Do you ever get lonely up here? Just you and Shadow?" Thomas considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. In town, surrounded by people, I was lonelier than I've ever been up here. The wilderness doesn't judge. It doesn't care what you look like or what mistakes you've made. It just is. And you either learn to be part of it or you don't." "I understand that," Martha said softly. "I was always lonely in Clemson Creek, even surrounded by people, especially surrounded by people." "You don't have to be lonely anymore," Thomas said. "You're part of this place now, part of our small family." Martha looked at Shadow, stretched out between them, and felt her heart swell with an emotion she barely recognized as happiness. Spring came slowly to the mountains, the snow retreating inch by inch, revealing the brown earth beneath. Martha had changed during the winter months. The constant physical work had reshaped her body, making her strong even if she remained large. But more importantly, something had changed inside her. She stood straighter now, spoke with more confidence, met the world with eyes that no longer automatically sought the ground. Thomas had begun teaching her to shoot, and she showed a natural aptitude for it. She could bring down small game now, contributing to their food stores in meaningful ways. One afternoon in early April, as Martha returned from checking the eastern trap line with Shadow, she heard voices near the cabin. Her first instinct was fear, but Shadow's low growl told her these were not friendly visitors. She crept closer, using the skills Thomas had taught her, and saw 3 men standing outside the cabin. One of them was her father. The other 2 were the Thornton brothers, Rebecca's older siblings, both known in Clemson Creek for their quick tempers and cruel streaks. Thomas stood in the doorway, his rifle held casually but ready. "I'm telling you one more time," Thomas was saying, his voice calm but hard. "Martha's not here, and even if she was, she wouldn't be going anywhere with you." "That girl is my daughter," Samuel Hayes said, his face red with anger or exertion from the climb. "You had no right to take her." "I didn't take her. She chose to leave. There's a difference." "She's simple-minded," Samuel insisted. "Can't make decisions for herself. I'm her legal guardian, and I want her back." "What you want," Thomas said, "doesn't matter anymore. She's an adult, and she's made her choice." Jacob Thornton, the eldest brother, stepped forward. "You're harboring stolen property, stranger. That's a crime. We could have the law on you." "The nearest law is 3 days' ride from here, and I doubt they'd be interested in your version of property rights. Now I suggest you gentlemen head back to Clemson Creek before the weather turns. These mountains can be dangerous for those who don't know them." "Is that a threat?" Samuel demanded. "It's a fact. Same fact I stated in your store back in winter. If you come looking for Martha again, if you try to hurt her or force her to do anything against her will, you'll regret it. I meant those words then, and I mean them now." Martha had heard enough. She stepped out of the trees, Shadow at her side, and all 3 visitors turned to stare at her. Her father's eyes widened. "Martha, good Lord, girl, what have you done to yourself?" She knew what he saw, a woman who barely resembled the frightened creature who had lived above his store. Her face was tanned from sun and wind, her body strong from months of hard work, her eyes clear and unafraid. "I've learned to live," Martha said simply. You look like a savage, Samuel spat, living up here like an animal with this madman and his beast. You're coming home right now. No, Martha said, and the word came easily now, without fear. I'm not. This is my home. Thomas is my family, and you have no power over me anymore. Rebecca's brother James laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your family? Girl, you're nothing but a burden to him, just like you were to your father. He's probably counting the days until he can be rid of you. Martha felt the old familiar pain trying to surface, but before it could take hold, Thomas spoke. Martha, he said gently, would you take Shadow and check on the root cellar? I need to finish this conversation with these gentlemen privately. Martha understood this was Thomas giving her the choice to stay or go, and she appreciated it. But she also understood that some conversations were better had without witnesses. Come on, Shadow, she said, and the lynx followed her around the side of the cabin. As soon as Martha was out of earshot, Thomas's demeanor changed. The casual friendliness disappeared, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. You have about 10 seconds to get off my land, he said quietly. Or what? Jacob Thornton challenged. You'll shoot us? You'd hang for murder. Who said anything about shooting? Thomas replied. These mountains are full of dangers, cliffs that crumble, ice that breaks, animals that defend their territory. Accidents happen all the time to people who don't know what they're doing. Samuel's face paled. You're threatening us. I'm warning you. There's a difference. Martha's not going back to Clemson Creek. She's not going to spend one more day being your punching bag, your excuse for every failure in your miserable life. She's done with you, done with your town, done with all of it. She's my daughter. She's a woman who you treated worse than an animal her entire life, Thomas interrupted. You don't get to call yourself her father. Fathers protect their children. They love them. They don't spend 19 years breaking them down piece by piece. James Thornton pulled a knife from his belt. Maybe we should just take her by force. What's one mountain man and a lynx against 3 of us? Thomas smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You really want to find out? Before anyone could move, Shadow came around the corner of the cabin, her teeth bared in a snarl that raised the hair on the back of everyone's necks. Behind her, Martha appeared, holding Thomas's second rifle with the competence of someone who knew how to use it. I believe Thomas asked you to leave, Martha said, her voice steady. I'm asking the same. Go back to Clemson Creek. Tell Rebecca and her friends. Tell everyone that I'm not coming back. Tell them I'm happy, I'm safe, and I'm exactly where I want to be. Samuel looked at his daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in her life. What he saw there made him take a step backward. You'll regret this, he said finally, the words lacking conviction. Both of you. The only thing I regret, Martha replied, is not leaving sooner. The 3 men retreated, stumbling through the melting snow toward the trail that would take them back to Clemson Creek. Thomas and Martha watched them go, standing side by side with Shadow between them. I'm sorry they found this place, Thomas said. I'm not, Martha replied. I needed to see them one more time to know I made the right choice. And I did. This is where I belong. Summer came to the mountains in a riot of green and gold. Martha tended a small garden she had planted near the cabin, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil with patience and determination. Thomas taught her to fish in the stream and to identify the herbs that could be used for medicine and cooking. One evening, as they sat outside the cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Shadow dozing at their feet, Martha spoke. I've been thinking, she said, about what comes next. Thomas looked at her with interest. What have you been thinking? You said last winter that come spring, I could decide what I wanted to do. Stay here, go somewhere else, even go back to Clemson Creek if I chose. I remember. I want to stay, Martha said, if you'll have me. Not just as someone you're helping, but as a true partner. I've learned so much, and I can do more. I can contribute more. I want to make this my life, our life, This place, this peace, this freedom, I don't want to give it up. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and Martha felt her heart clench with fear that she had overstepped, assumed too much. "Martha," Thomas said finally, "you've been a true partner since the day you chose to leave with me. You've worked harder than anyone I've ever known. You've learned faster, adapted better. This cabin, this life, it's as much yours as it is mine. More, maybe, because you chose it knowing what you were leaving behind. I would be honored to have you stay, not just for a season, but for as long as you want." Relief and joy flooded through Martha in equal measure. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," Thomas said gently. "Thank you. You've given me something I thought I'd lost when Sarah died. You've given me purpose beyond mere survival. You've reminded me what it means to be part of a family." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Shadow stirred, then rose and walked to the edge of the clearing, her ears pricked forward. "Someone's coming," Thomas said, reaching for his rifle. But it was not the Thorntons or Samuel Hayes who emerged from the trees. It was a young woman, her clothes torn and dirty, her face bruised and swollen. "Please," she gasped, falling to her knees. "Please help me. My husband, he's going to kill me. I ran, but he's following. Please." Martha and Thomas exchanged a glance, and in that moment, they both understood what this cabin in the mountains could become. Not just a refuge for them, but for others who needed escape from cruelty, who needed a place to heal and grow strong. "Come inside," Martha said, helping the woman to her feet. "You're safe now. We'll protect you."